Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today, we're going to be looking at something that I think everyone can relate to in some way, and that's waiting.
Yeah.
And we're going to use the Yi Jing as our guide for this, specifically the fifth Hexagram Xu.
Yeah, the I Ching, it's not really like a fortune-telling thing. It's more like I guess you would call it, a way to kind of look at the patterns of change, to see how things are developing, and to maybe get some insights into how to react to that or to understand it better.
And this particular Hexagram Xu sets the stage with this really evocative image, dense clouds not raining.
Right.
So you get this feeling of anticipation, like something's about to happen.
Yeah, it really captures that kind of feeling of potential,
Yeah.
but at the same time, a recognition that maybe it's not quite the right time to act.
So it's not just sitting around doing nothing. There's an active element to this waiting.
Absolutely. Xu was formed by two trigrams, Kan, which represents perilous waters. It's above Qian, which represents creative heaven. So this kind of shows that during these waiting periods, there's a very powerful interplay of forces, like challenge and potential all mixed together.
Something's brewing beneath the surface, and I love that the message of the hexagram even uses this really interesting analogy.
Yeah.
What is that?
It compares this waiting to a pearl that's buried deep in the earth. And it's hidden for a long time until a strong wind comes and blows away the soil. And the pearl naturally kind of emerges and begins anew.
So it's like this gestation period where something really valuable is forming, even though we can't see it.
Exactly. It's a necessary stage of development.
That I Ching also has these things called deductions, which are basically insights into different aspects of life. And for Xu, the deductions are planning will succeed, marriage is harmonious, wealth seeking is as expected, and movement brings joy. So I'm curious how these connect back to waiting.
Well, the deductions are really showing how important patience is in many different areas of life. You know, whether you're planning out a project or you're working on a relationship, or even if you're pursuing a financial goal. This ability to wait for the right moment can have a big impact on the outcome.
So it's not waiting around hoping for the best. You're actively preparing and making sure that you're ready when that time comes.
Exactly. Like an athlete training for the Olympics. They might spend years getting ready,
Yeah.
honing their skills. And that period of waiting is what allows them to really excel when they get to that world stage.
That's a great analogy. It shows how waiting isn't about being passive. So how do we navigate this waiting period? Does the I Ching offer any guidance on that?
It does. The hexagram is broken down into 6 individual lines. Each one gives a specific piece of advice for different stages of waiting. It's like a roadmap
Yeah.
to help you through this kind of complex terrain.
Okay, so walk me through these lines. What does that first stage of waiting look like?
Well, the first line talks about waiting patiently, outside of the center of action. So it's more about observing the situation, gathering information, biding your time before making a move.
Okay, so it's not about jumping in head first.
Right.
It's more strategic,
Yeah.
waiting for the right moment.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the second line?
The second line speaks to the kind of challenges of waiting. Talks about those minor inconveniences, little setbacks that you might encounter.
It's a reminder that waiting isn't always easy.
Right.
There are going to be bumps in the road.
Yeah. And then the third line, it warns us about the dangers of becoming stagnant while waiting. You want to stay engaged, find ways to keep moving forward, even when it feels like things are at a standstill.
So you can't just be passive. You have to keep that momentum going.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's next?
Well, line 4, that's where things get a little more intense. It suggests a period of real challenge or maybe even danger. It's symbolized by waiting in blood and emerging from a hole. It's basically reminding us that sometimes these waiting periods really test our resilience.
Wow, that's powerful imagery. So we've got patience, perseverance. We have to be proactive, and we have to be resilient. What about the last two lines?
Line 5 brings a sense of relief. It suggests that comfort and sustenance will arrive, leading to positive outcomes.
Okay, so after the storm comes the calm.
You could say that. And finally, line 6, it reminds us that unexpected events can still occur, but they can actually lead to really good results if you approach them with respect and flexibility.
So you have to be adaptable, open to new possibilities.
Exactly.
Even when things don't go as planned.
Right. Each one of those lines gives us a different perspective on waiting and how it's a really dynamic process with highs and lows and challenges and opportunities.
I'm really starting to see how waiting is more complex than I initially thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to think about these lines and see which one maybe resonates with you and your own experience.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have you ever found yourself relating to one of these lines in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all been in those situations. where we're kind of forced to wait for something, whether it's a job offer or a medical diagnosis, even just waiting for the light to turn green. And in those moments, I think the I Ching can offer us a lot of comfort and guidance.
It's like having this ancient sage whispering wisdom in your ear.
Exactly.
To help you make sense of this whole waiting game.
And I think that's what makes it so timeless. It really speaks to a universal human experience. And it gives us insights to help us deal with these inevitable waiting periods that we all go through.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here. From dense clouds to pearls buried in the earth, it's clear that waiting, as the I Ching suggests, is a lot more than just biding your time.
Right. It's a really rich concept. I'm excited to explore it more.
Me too. We'll be right back to delve even deeper into the I Ching's wisdom on waiting. Okay, so we're back. And I'm still thinking about those 6 lines of the Xu hexagram. It's just incredible how something so ancient can feel so relevant to our lives today.
I know, it's fascinating, isn't it? The I Ching has this way of, tapping into those universal human experiences.
Yeah.
And waiting is definitely one of those things that transcends both time and culture.
And we were talking about how the I Ching views waiting not as this passive state, but as an active process.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the importance of timing.
Yeah, exactly. Rushing into action before it's time can really lead to setbacks and problems, whereas waiting for the right moment can sometimes make all the difference.
Makes you think about everything in nature, how it has its own rhythm and timing. Like a seed needs time to sprout, a flower needs time to bloom. We can't force these things.
And yet we live in a world that's obsessed with speed and instant gratification. It can be really hard to find that balance between patience and action.
So how do we apply this ancient wisdom to our modern lives? What are some practical examples of this?
Well, let's say you're thinking about a major purchase like a house. You might feel pressure to jump on the first opportunity you see, especially in competitive market. But remember that pearl analogy. Sometimes the most valuable things, they need that period of gestation.
So it's about being patient and strategic, not impulsive.
Exactly. Taking the time to research your options, waiting for the right property to come along, that could save you a lot of stress and maybe even prevent some financial hardship in the future.
That's a great example. What about something like starting a new job? How does this concept of timing apply there?
Okay, so imagine you get a job offer, looks perfect on paper, but something feels off about the timing. Maybe you got other commitments or your gut is telling you to wait. You know the wisdom of you. It encourages you to trust that inner voice.
So it's not just external factors. It's also about tuning into our own internal sense of timing.
Absolutely. And this applies to relationships too. We often feel like we have to rush into these big declarations of love or commitment, but allowing feelings to develop naturally, giving the relationship time to breathe, that can actually create a much stronger foundation.
So it's about respecting the natural rhythm of things, whether it's buying a house, starting a new job, or building a relationship.
Precisely. However, there is another side to this. While waiting for the right timing is essential, it's also important to understand that there are some potential downsides to waiting too long.
That's a good point. I can see how. Becoming fixated on waiting for that perfect moment could lead to missed opportunities, or maybe even a sense of stagnation. So how do we find that balance between being patient and being proactive?
Well, the I Ching isn't telling us to just be passive. It's more about a dynamic kind of waiting. It's about being observant, preparing yourself, and being ready to act when the right opportunity presents itself.
So it's about being mindful of the potential risks of both rushing in and waiting indefinitely. We need to find that sweet spot where we're not being impulsive, but we're also not letting indecision paralyze us.
Yeah, you could think of it as this kind of dance between action and stillness. You're constantly adjusting based on what's happening and also based on your own inner wisdom.
I'm seeing how this whole concept of waiting is much more nuanced and active than we might initially think.
It really is. And while we've focused on the benefits, I think it's also essential to acknowledge the emotional toll that waiting can take on us.
Absolutely. Waiting can be so frustrating and discouraging, even anxiety-provoking sometimes, especially when we're dealing with something really important to us.
It's that feeling of being in limbo, not knowing when or if things will change. And that uncertainty can be really hard to handle.
So how do we cope with those feelings of uncertainty and discomfort? Does the I Ching offer any guidance on that?
Well, while the I Ching doesn't give us any specific techniques, it does stress the importance of inner strength and resilience. It encourages us to face challenges with courage and to trust that even the hard times serve a purpose
So it's about tapping into our own inner resources and finding ways to support ourselves emotionally during those tough waiting periods.
Exactly. This is where self-care becomes so important, whether it's through mindfulness practices, connecting with loved ones, or just spending time in nature. It's essential to take care of ourselves and find those sources of comfort and support.
So it's a reminder that waiting isn't just a mental or strategic challenge, it's also an emotional one. We need to be kind to ourselves during these times and find ways to replenish our energy.
Beautifully said. So we've explored both the good and the bad when it comes to waiting. But before we wrap up, I want to shift our focus to one last piece, one crucial aspect of waiting that the I Ching highlights.
I'm all ears. What else can we learn from this ancient text about navigating this whole waiting game? We've been talking about the I Ching's view of waiting as an active process, about finding the right time to act, and even those tough emotional challenges that waiting can bring. So what's this crucial aspect that you wanted to mention?
Well, the I Ching reminds us that waiting isn't just about reaching some desired outcome. It's also about how we transform during that waiting process.
So it's not just about getting to the destination, it's also about the journey itself.
Exactly. The Yi Hexagram really emphasizes that waiting can be this period of incredible growth and self-discovery. It's a time where we can cultivate patience and resilience and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, it's like those times when you're waiting for something and you end up learning so much about yourself, even if it wasn't what you originally expected to learn.
It's like that analogy we talked about of the pearl forming within the earth, that takes time pressure and even a bit of darkness for that pearl to develop its beauty and strength. And in the same way, we often go through these transformations during times of waiting.
So even though waiting can be really frustrating and difficult, it can also be a valuable experience.
Absolutely. The I Ching really encourages us to embrace those waiting periods in our lives, not as obstacles, but as opportunities for inner growth and transformation.
As we wrap up, what are some key takeaways for our listeners? How can they put this wisdom into practice?
Remember, the I Ching isn't like a set of strict rules. It's more like a framework for understanding life's complexities. So the first step is to simply become more aware of those waiting periods in your own life. Notice how you react to them. Do you resist the waiting or try to embrace it?
So it's about becoming more conscious of our own patterns and reactions.
Exactly. And once you start paying attention to that, you can begin to change your perspective. Instead of thinking of waiting as a passive delay, think of it as an active process of preparation, growth, and transformation.
So we can ask ourselves, what can I learn from this experience? How can I use this time to cultivate patience? Or become more resilient? Or maybe just understand myself better?
Exactly. And remember, it's okay to feel frustrated. Waiting isn't always easy. Just be kind to yourself. Do things that nourish you and help you stay grounded.
So it's a combination of shifting our perspective, building inner strength, and taking care of ourselves.
That's it. And ultimately, the goal isn't to eliminate waiting. It's about learning to navigate it with more awareness.
And maybe even a sense of curiosity. You never know what you might discover in those hidden moments of waiting.
What a beautiful thought. In a world that's always telling us to go faster and do more, maybe the wisest thing we can do is embrace the power of waiting. Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive.